I think I gave someone brain damage.
I bullied an autistic kid.
My alcohol addiction began at 15 years old.
I bullied my aunt into moving out.
I could have killed someone.
I gave up on my dreams because I hated myself.
I went to bed without saying anything to my father, not knowing I will never see him again.
Now, normally I just stay quiet behind the camera, but I feel like I have to explain myself with this one.
For a bunch of kids who've never really done this before, I think we created a lot of work to be proud of. From aesthetic coming-of-age montages to scary short films and some purely coincidental typecasts,
I'm not gay.
somehow we've never actually talked about ourselves.
So we're doing a documentary.
I'm thinking maybe. I don't really know.
There needs to be like a general topic, like genuinely life. Our views on life, what life means. What is the meaning of life?
For our final, we knew that we wanted to talk about us. But how do you create a meaningful visual story with people who are on totally different paths and different fields? Plus, talking about yourself isn't really that hard anyway. But what about the parts we're not proud of?
Because I was ashamed of who I am, or I am ashamed of who I am.
So we each wrote down our truth and then had another group member anonymously present
My
it.
shit is like,
That way we could be completely honest and share a piece of ourselves along the way. And now we're gonna share that with you.
It started with being verbally berated, some things getting thrown at my head, till I had to shield myself with my hands. However, maybe because of a parent or a fourth grader's idea of atonement, my bully invited me to his birthday. I actually had a pretty good time. A day later, I suddenly felt a kick to my back. Just when I thought we were finally friends, I picked him up and threw him to the ground. He was motionless. I looked up at the horrified kids around me, kids who watched him hurt me every day and didn't blink. To them, I was now the monster. I started crying. I don't think about it much now, but sometimes, when I do, I feel like he deserved it.
Marvin was my classmate from 6th grade. At first, I paid him no mind. He was just like everyone else. But as I got to know people, I noticed that Marvin loved to draw. He never showed them off, but if you asked, you could see his face light up as he explained every detail. As time passed, people began pointing out the weird things Marvin would do. It started with him being ignored in group projects, and it soon became the norm. I was desperate to fit in. That's why I joined in. He never bothered anybody and kept to himself, but his differences made him stand out. The way he ate, the way he talked, even his hobbies. I judged him. I harassed him. By shifting the focus onto someone else, I could ignore my own flaws and enjoy a false sense of security. I sacrificed his comfort for my own, not realizing what I was doing. The day he started crying was the day I realized what I had done. I saw how my actions were impacting others. I noticed the little things he stopped doing. He started sitting farther away from everyone during lunch. He stopped talking to other people. He even stopped bringing his drawings to class. Even now, I still feel guilty about what I did, and I never got the chance to apologize.
15 years old, that was the first time I ever drank. It wasn't new to me because everyone in my family drinks. It was all I ever knew growing up, and it was the only thing that brought me comfort. It felt like home. I told myself I'll only do it once with my friends, and then it was every day. It was how I started my mornings and how I got myself to sleep at night. I'm not proud of who I was, but when you grow up in a house that's always on fire, you think the whole world is on fire. And that was the only way I knew how to put it up. I know now that I don't have to end up like my family, and there are other ways to cope that don't end up with empty bottles and a night of regret.
I was 8 years old when she moved in with us. She didn't speak any English. It was already hard enough trying to find a job and learn a new language, but on top of that, I used to make fun of her. I would say things like, "You don't live here. This isn't your house, it's mine. You should leave," out of spite. I remember hearing her crying and not knowing it was my own doing. I just added to her sadness and stress. She ended up leaving, and now that I'm older, I can't help but feel a little guilty and I'm a little bit responsible for adding fuel to the fire. I will always be sorry I ever made her feel unwelcome, especially during a time she needed support.
I was driving the speed limit down the road I've taken a million times before. I didn't think much of the bumper-to-bumper traffic in the opposite lane until a kid ran out in front of my car. I stopped short, not even 5 feet away from him. If I changed the radio or even sneezed, I could have ruined both of our lives in a second. I called the cops and they thanked me for saving his life, except I didn't. I just stopped myself from killing him. I did everything right. There was nothing I could have done to avoid it, but I still have nightmares about him, in his red shirt and no shoes. I see him down that street every time I drive by.
I grew up playing baseball since I was 9 years old, and it was all I ever knew. It wasn't until I was 13 that I began to question my sexuality, and that's when my teammates started to question it as well.
During games, I would get verbally and physically assaulted, and that was only the beginning of my torment. I actually had a future for myself in the majors, but instead, I would go to sleep every night praying that I wouldn't wake up the next day. I hated myself. I hated myself more than they could ever possibly hate me, and I gave up everything when I could have had it all.
Every day, I regret not having said goodbye to him. I heard him that morning saying goodbye to my sister and mother, but instead, I stayed in bed. I didn't even bother to say goodbye to him. Now that I think about it, I wish I had said how much I care about him before he died. Now, no more hugs, no more kisses, no more goodbyes.
You can judge us, but we won't. For a random group project in what happens to be an elective class for most people, I think we're all walking out of here knowing a little bit too much about each other, but that's not a bad thing. It just goes to show that we're not really strangers after all. And that it's okay to talk about these things. Even the parts we're not proud of.